1. Let me preface this with a couple of noteworthy things. I'm not exactly sure how old this building is. All that I know is it's old, pre-war German apartment. 2 people have died in this apartment that I know of. Both of them were my family members. But this house has been haunted for long before their deaths. Now, as for the experiences themselves, I guess I'll start with the creepiest ones. I was about 7 to 8 years old at the time, and I saw big red eyes in the bathroom. As you can imagine, I just bolted out of there. I never saw those eyes again, and I hope I never will. Honestly, I've never experienced a feeling of dread like that again, until about 3 months ago. My computer desk is in front of my bed, and I always make sure that chair isn't facing my bed. One night I woke up, feeling uneasy, and surprise, surprise, my chair is facing towards me and I can make out a vague dark shape sitting in it, staring at me intently. So, I send a pretty loud expletive, jump out of my bed and turn on the light. Whatever was in that chair disappeared, and I didn't go back to sleep that night. Hallway that leads to the bathroom has a pretty big wall mirror. One night I was walking towards the bathroom. I noticed something walking behind me in that mirror. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I know that it was slightly shorter than I am, me being 6 feet tall. I have to keep my room door slightly ajar due to my dumbass cat meowing whenever they are closed, and during the night sometimes I catch them moving ever so slightly. Also, for whatever reason, my cat is absolutely terrified of staying in my room. Coincidentally, one of the persons that I wrote about earlier did die in this room. One of the more recent ones happened probably about a month ago. In order for me to wash my hair, I have to bend down. As I was rinsing my hair, I've noticed that lights in the shower room were flickering. I've heard someone calling my name in a really weird way. If you've ever heard EVP, it was kinda like that, except you could hear it with your own ears. And there was a shadow moving back and forth under the doors. And for the last one, as I was brushing my teeth, I have heard a loud sigh in the kitchen, and the sound of tapestry being torn off. Honestly, there has been more, but it's pretty normal for a haunted house. I've been hearing steps, whispers, cold spots. Most of it seems to be centered around the hallway, kitchen, and my room, which is unpleasant to say the least. 2. My first cousin, same age as me, lived in the country growing up. I was a city kid, so I enjoyed the change of pace when I visited him. I have been intrigued by the paranormal since I was little, and that hadn't changed, even through my middle high school years. It was 2005 and I had just turned 16 and gotten my license. Naturally, I drove out to spend time with my cousin, since I could take myself without depending on a ride. He had been mud bogging the past weekend. For anyone unfamiliar, this is taking any kind of vehicle and driving through thick puddles of mud. And he wanted me to look at a picture he had taken of one of the jeeps that had gotten stuck. He pulled it up on his computer, and as I'm looking, I see what looks like a girl in a pink dress with long dark hair in the driver's seat. It was pretty blurry, but distinctive enough that I asked, "Who's the girl?" My cousin said, "That's why I wanted to show you this picture. There weren't any girls with us down there." Keep in mind, my cousin was a country kid and didn't have any knowledge of Photoshop or even MS Paint for that matter. So there was no way he could have altered the picture whatsoever. Fast forward a few years. I was of drinking age and my girlfriend and I were playing beer pong at my cousin's house. Nothing strange occurred that night until it was time for us to go to sleep. As my girlfriend and I were getting settled down for the night, we heard 3 extremely loud bangs on the front door, almost as if something was attempting to kick it in. My cousin jumped up, as did I, and ran to the door with pistols in hand. Upon checking, we found absolutely nothing, and the dogs outside were quiet, as if they hadn't seen or heard a thing. Fast forward a few more years. My cousin had befriended a girl through mutual smoking interests, and she had taken a liking to being at his house every weekend. We all partied together and talked about the paranormal things we had seen and experienced. The girl told us she had an interest in the paranormal as well, and felt she was very spiritual. A few months later, the girl moved her daughter in with my cousin, as things were getting more serious between them, and she needed the help. This is when things started happening again. Amber, my cousin's girlfriend, started mentioning that she was having really bad nightmares about a girl jumping off of a rock deep in the woods and hanging herself. And it wasn't anyone Amber had ever seen before. She said sometimes she would wake up and thought she could see the girl with bright green eyes at the foot of her bed, walking off and through the hallway of the house before disappearing. I didn't catch wind of this until one night I showed up to a party and hang out when I saw a girl walk through the yard and into the darkness of the woods. I figured it was Amber or my cousin's mom, but I thought it was odd that they didn't have a flashlight. I got out of my car and called out to whoever it was and got no response. When I asked my cousin about it, Amber started freaking out. I told her not to worry about it, that maybe I was just seeing things, although I was absolutely sure someone had walked through the yard. Amber continued to see things for the next few weeks, eyes peering through a crack in the door of the bathroom, lights passing by the windows at night, without even a road nearby, shadows moving around the rooms and on the ceiling. The final straw came about a year ago. Things had settled for a while. Everyone was in their routine, relaxing for the night, when Amber's daughter screamed from across the house. She said there was a woman at her bedroom door, watching her from the doorway. She described her with long black hair, green eyes, and pale skin. My cousin has since moved in with me. Amber and her daughter are living with her parents, and they have been looking for a new house ever since. 3. One summer night, 4 or 5 years ago, I was having a barbecue in the backyard with my cousin and her boyfriend. We had a good time. We ate, we talked. The food was good. Everything went well. It was already 2 or 3 a.m., so we decided to clean the mess we did and for them to go home. Her boyfriend went to the car with some stuff and waited for her inside the vehicle. Me and my cousin grabbed the cutlery and plates and were heading for the kitchen inside the house. On our way, a strange, cute black cat appeared. You could tell that the cat was under 1 year old because of its size. I considered it was strange because it appeared from nowhere and didn't seem to be very afraid of us, and kept this blank expression on its face, a bit robotic, maybe. The cat was very calm when my cousin started petting it. I cannot tell you exactly what it was, but I had cats all my life, and there was something off and peculiar about this one. I could tell by looking at my cousin that she also wasn't into it that much, although she loves animals, especially cats and dogs. We entered the house, and when I was about to shut the door, the cat tried to enter, forcing itself inside the house. I stopped it by blocking it with my foot and shut the door. I already had a cat, and didn't want to let it in because there was a possibility that they would fight. My cat is very territorial. It seemed a bit funny at first until it started pushing the door with quite some force, and then it nervously banged itself into the door constantly, meowing like crazy, irritated by the fact that we left it outside and it couldn't get in. I was looking at my cousin with a shocked expression on my face. She seemed to be a bit terrified. We both were. A strange black cat at 2 or 3 a.m. in pitch black, with a weight of under 2 kilos, was wildly hitting my door with its body, with a force that it should not have had. Yikes. Now the fun part begins. The cat seemed to have stopped. Me and my cuz were still shocked. I slightly opened the door, and my cat just ran outside from inside the house. She went into the night. We couldn't see very much, but we heard them fighting. My cat, brave and strong and kind-hearted, was battling with the black beast. I could hear the fighting meows of rage of my cat that I know pretty well. She fought other cats before. But the other one, the black one, was producing odd and loud noises. And at one point it started making sounds of a monster. Yes, exactly like something demonic. Then we started hearing small and heavy objects from my backyard banging, smashing, falling as the black cat monster was still fighting my cat and still producing those awful sounds. At that moment we were freaked out. I opened the door to save my cat, and she went inside by herself, well and unharmed. There was no sign of the black one anywhere. I don't need to tell that me and my cousin were shocked of what we heard that night. A couple of days later I saw the black cat again, but this time in daylight, and I just chased her off. Didn't see it since then, fortunately. Just so you know, I am aware of what crazy sounds cats make, especially while mating. I'm sure that what we heard was nothing cat-like. I know that when you read this short and boring story of mine, it doesn't seem much, and I know that cats are funny and strange and crazy. But I was there that night, along with my cousin, and I know that neither of us are crazy. I got scared of its power when it pushed and banged the door like crazy with its own body. I was even more scared when I heard it making loud noises, and terrified when it started making demonic roars and breaking down stuff from my yard that a normal cat shouldn't be able to do. After this episode, I didn't think much about it again, but I remember today, and I decided posting here in order to share with others this event. And maybe someone can provide a good explanation of what it was. Thank you for reading, and for your interest. 4. I have had 0 paranormal experiences in the last 10 years. It was at its peak between age 8 and 18, and slowly dropped off. I don't know why I went through what I did as a child and teenager. Living in a haunted house when I was in the 4th grade is what capitulated me into the unwanted world of the weird. This house was, to this day, the scariest place I have ever stepped foot in. It was odd from the beginning, but it wasn't too weird until I actually started experiencing inexplicable shit. I've told my story of this house before, so I don't really want to go through it again. I might have left some stuff out, but you get the idea. After we moved back home to our beloved hometown, anywhere would have been great as long as it got me away from that house. I had an experience with my best friend at the elementary school, and one of our friends' house at a sleepover. This is the 2nd creepiest paranormal experience of my life. I also had one weird experience I'm not quite sure about yet. I was at my house using the bathroom. My room was right next to the bathroom when, all of a sudden, I hear something fall in my room. I jump up off the toilet and run into my room. I had an Easter basket on my dresser with a whole bunch of random stuff in it, jewelry and such. Well, it had appeared to have been thrown off my dresser. It was all the way on the other side of the room. The weird thing is that there was a bunch of stuff in front of it on my dresser, and none of that stuff was moved. So the basket couldn't have fallen. And how does a basket jump over stuff and fall all the way across a room anyway? So I don't know. I don't really count it as paranormal, but it's definitely something I have always kept in my mind as unexplained. I moved out when I was 17. The house was okay. I was home alone all the time. Well, odd things started happening. My dolphin knickknacks were on my counter and windowsill in the bathroom. Well, I would notice that some of them would be conspicuously turned. I kept turning them back. Then a short amount of time later, they'd be turned again. I blamed it on my boyfriend. I started hearing odd things at night. It sounded like pipes rubbing together really loudly. It reminded me of the sound the Titanic made when it was falling apart. Now keep in mind that was probably nothing, but at the time it was creepy to me. Added on to that, one more incident happened involving my radio dial getting turned while I was listening to music. All of this together wasn't much, but it prompted me to ask my landlord if anyone had died in the house. He jumped back and nearly fell over. "Why? Do you think it's haunted?" I said I don't know, a few odd things have happened. He told me an old man had died there. So I just went on living life as normal. I thought if my house is haunted, it's by a nice friendly old man. Maybe a pervert, I don't know, if he was, but he sure would have loved it if he was, because I was naked all the time. Well, we moved out after a year of living there. I was sad. I loved the house. It was my first home with my boyfriend. I had my baby there and so many good memories. Well, a year or two later, my aunt and my cousins moved into the house. Now, I had told everyone in my family that the house was haunted. When I lived there, no one believed me. Well, about 10 months into them living there, crazy shit started happening. My cousin started waking up with big scratches all over her. Stuff would move in front of their eyes, etc. When my aunt would come home, the door would just slightly open. It progressively started getting worse and worse. I was a bit skeptical, like, all this weird shit didn't happen to me. Just a few odd things. Nothing really that out there at all. I started to really believe them when my cousin, we'll call him B, started to experience it too. He has always been a quiet, logical, no BS kind of person. He went on to the Air Force and is now a guard at a prison. He's just always been mature and level-headed. Anyways, one night, he said he woke up, and there was an old man floating over him growling. That's when it started amping up. They would stay at my grandma's for a few days just to get sleep, and when they stayed at their house, they all three would sleep together in the kitchen. I guess that's the only place they felt safe. I've seen pictures my cousin took. One was inside the closet, and it looked exactly like a little blonde boy in a black cloak with an orb on each side of his head. It was trippy as fuck. They brought in a paranormal team, and that didn't help. They just came in, recorded, and left. They said they didn't find anything. After that, they brought in my grandma's preacher to come over to pray, and that just made it worse. They were finally able to move out after about 2 years there. This is the one thing that made my grandparents into believers, after living their whole lives not believing in anything that wasn't the Bible. I just wondered why it wasn't that bad when I lived there. Like, I knew something funny was going on, but it wasn't that bad. Maybe because I wasn't scared? And it didn't start happening until they'd been there about 10 months. Anyway, after that, I haven't really experienced anything, and I want to know why. When my boyfriend and I finally got into a house and nothing happened, I was so relieved. I had always thought in the back of my mind that it was my fault all this paranormal stuff had happened to me and my friends and family. I mean, I was the common denominator in all these instances. It's been 10 years now, and I've only had a few odd experiences, but nothing too crazy that I would definitely classify as paranormal. I'm thankful, but it also bugs me. Like, it seems like such a long time ago. Was any of it real? Like, I can't deny what I experienced. Why has nothing happened now, though? Not like I really want it to, but no, I just feel kinda crazy. If any of you had paranormal experiences as children and teenagers, but nothing as an adult? 5. I'm a 32-year-old man. Yet it is broad daylight as I write this post because what I am about to share haunts me to this day, to the point that merely thinking about, or in this case typing this memory, is enough to send chills down my body and make me feel like a terrified child. I have only told this story to a handful of people over the past 10 years, because of how terrifying an experience it was for me. But I feel like it can be therapeutic to get it off my chest and share with others. Maybe others have had a similar experience. If so, please let me know. To tell this story and give it justice, I have to tell you of an experience that happened 3 years before the terrifying encounter this post is about. Buckle up. This will be a long post, but definitely not boring. My name is Joshua, and I will change the names to protect the privacy of the others involved in this story. I live in Arkansas, and in late 2003, near the middle of fall, right before it started getting really cold, my wife and I were invited to a camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugarloaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet at Sugarloaf, and my friend, we will call him Bob, wanted to take me and my wife around to some paranormal places in the Sugarloaf area. So we got there around 7 p.m. I was driving a white Ford 1996 F-150. Bob was driving a 1980-something white Celebrity. Was really a piece of crap vehicle. Anywho, it was late dusk, becoming dark, and we all climbed into Bob's car and he took us around the area. First to an old abandoned house, but other than some raccoons rustling about, it was a 2-hour waste of time. Then he took us to a graveyard that was supposed to be haunted, again a bust. Then an old church that was run down and supposed to be haunted, once again, yawn. At this point it was getting close to midnight, and my wife and I were getting pretty bored, and I spoke up to Bob saying, "Man, this really hasn't been that freaky of a night." That's when Bob smiled, saying he was saving the best for last. He handed me a Polaroid picture of a hillside, covered in trees in daylight. I asked him what it was, and he asked me if I saw a house or any type of light pole or anything in the picture, to which I replied no. He took the picture back and said, "That's because there isn't, and there are no power lines either." About this time he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. Then after that it was 2 miles of dirt road with woods on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other, with about 2 acres of field connecting to a wooded hillside. Nothing to light the night, except the full moon above head and the clear, starry sky. After what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us to get out. We did as he asked. He walked us to the side of the car where the fence, field, and wooded hillside was. He looked at his cell phone, which his phone and mine had no signal. This was 2003 and the area had no cell towers. But he looked at his phone and said it was 11:57 and told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even at complete dark, I could tell this was the same field and hillside from the picture. 2 minutes go by and nothing has changed. Then at exactly midnight, a small light flickers on in the middle of the hillside. A chill runs down my back as my wife, Bob, his girlfriend, and myself watch as this small light, which to me looked like an old kerosene lantern, began to move, swaying back and forth. We sat and watched in complete silence for what seemed like several minutes, and then I finally spoke up and asked what the story was with this. Bob replied he did not know, but locals had told him that at midnight every night this lantern will light up and sway back and forth through the woods until the sun comes up, and it disappears. Nobody knew what this story was. At the time, I was a 19-year-old guy who didn't think anything could scare me or hurt me. So, since there were no houses around, I yelled out, "We see you," while you were so scary with your little lantern. Bob shushed me, but it was too late. My wife screamed and pointed. I was laughing, but my laughing stopped as I looked to the hillside to see the lantern swaying back and forth but moving down the hillside to the field at an unhuman pace. Gliding, it began to speed across the field towards our car. We didn't stick around to see what it was because within seconds we were in the car and flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back to see the lantern moving slowly back up the hillside to where it first appeared. The ride back was silent until Bob spoke up, saying, "Crap, I forgot to put gas in the car earlier." and the only store around is closed. And if we decided to go back, out anywhere, it'd be best to take my truck until he could get gas in the morning, as he only had about a quarter tank. I said okay, and a few minutes later we arrived back at Sugarloaf Lake. We had parked by the lake docks, and we dropped my tailgate and sat and talked about what had just happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him she was hungry. He told her we had brought some snacks, but she said she needed actual food. But since the local store was closed, he asked if we could take my truck to the next town over and get some food because his car wouldn't have enough gas to get us to that town. I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up, and loaded into my truck. I turned the key and nothing happened. My truck was dead. Deader than dead. No ding, no lights, no clicking noise, nothing. For all intents and purposes, you would think the alternator was out. This was strange, and after the night we had, it made us all feel uneasy. We got out of the truck and popped the hood, pulled Bob's car around to the front, and attempted to jump my truck with his car. This is where it gets even weirder. As soon as we connect the jumper cables to his battery, and mine, his girlfriend starts his car, and within a second, the cables between the connectors start to smoke, and in a flash of fire they burn up within seconds. The cables were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash, with only the end clamps still on our batteries. Bob runs and turns off his car, and we take the clamps off our batteries. We look at each other in the eerie moon and starlit night. Did I mention there were no light poles around? And we both get a bad feeling at the exact same time as we suddenly realize we had been hearing a distant noise in the lake that was getting louder. It was a boat motor. Now, like I said, this was the time of year it was starting to get cold, especially at night. We were bundled up, as it was, and we were standing still on land at night, but somebody was out on a boat after midnight? When it had to be as chilly as all get out with the wind hitting them. And from the sound of this motor, it was going pretty fast, but we saw nothing. That is until the boat was about 50 yards away, and a very bright spotlight comes on, temporarily blinding us all. Bob and I tell the women to get into his car and lock the doors. I reach onto the bed of my truck and give Bob a tire tool, and I pick up another. I work at a tire shop and had all kinds of tools of the trade in my truck. We're standing in front of the vehicles in the middle, the hoods up on both, as the boat pulls up to the dock and two heavily bearded men in their 30s to 40s step out of the boat and walk up. It's hard to give an accurate description as their spotlight was still pointed at us, and it covered the men in an eerie shadow whilst blinding Bob and I. They look at us and at our vehicles, and one glances in the direction of the car at the women, then back at us, and lets out a small chuckle. "You fellers got some sort of car trouble?" One asks as he lights up a cigarette. "Yeah, but it's nothing we can't handle," I stammer. The guy with his cigarette sniffs the air and looks down between Bob and I's feet and sees the still smoking ashes of what was the jumper cable. "Looks like it was more than your pussy jumper cables could handle. You all need some help? We got some tools on the boat that I think could fix you guys' problems right up." Then the other man who had chuckled in the beginning says, "Fix them right up." I'm speechless at this moment, probably with my mouth hanging open, I can't remember, as the two men walk back to their boat, and we hear what sounds like chains rattling around, as we try to make out what they are doing, but the spotlight is so blinding we can barely see. But the chain noise was enough. Bob looked at me, and without saying a word, we both jumped in his car and drove the fuck out of there. For the next few hours we drove to a populated area of houses, which wasn't many in the rural area we were pretty much stuck in, since we had very little fuel. But we all sat in the car, mostly quiet, looking around in all directions in near panic, thinking at any time those men would find us. Bob would turn his lights on every now and then, thinking he had seen some movement in the dark. After a while, the women fell asleep, and Bob and I talked about how fucking weird this whole ordeal had been. And he laughed, saying, "I told you it would be a scary night. I just didn't know it would be this sort of scary." At this point, the paranormal lantern wasn't even the main thing freaking me out. But the men never showed, and eventually, the morning was on its way. And it was about 20 minutes until sunrise. And Bob asked if we could go see if the lantern really disappears at sunrise. I asked if he was sure he had enough gas, and he said, "Yeah, the local store opens up in about an hour, so we'll be fine." I tell him in that case then, yeah. We wake the women up and drive back to that hillside. We get there with about 4 minutes left until sunrise. We still see the lantern swaying in the woods. Bob looks at me and I smile and do the motion for zipping my lips. And we all watch and wonder as right at sunrise, the lantern slowly fades away to nothing. After this, we get back in the car and drive back to the lake, feeling safer now. When we get there, there is no sign of the boat, and the hood of my truck is still up and the doors are still locked. On a whim, I tell Bob I'm going to try to start the truck one more time, before he drives us somewhere where I can get a cell signal and call for help. And I'll be damned. The truck started right up with no hesitation or problem. We all went our separate ways, happy to have seen the sunrise, and counting our blessings and swearing to leave the paranormal investigating in this area to others, and swearing that we never wanted to come back to this area and run into the boat people again. However, all things fade with time, even fear and common sense. 3 years later, Bob, who I haven't seen in almost 2 years at that point, calls me up and says he has a proposition for me. He goes on to tell me he has a group of himself and 3 other Wiccans who go out and do seance in haunted places, and asked me if I would be willing to film their sessions in the haunted places for their records, and that they would pay me well for my services. I am no Wiccan, but I have always loved the paranormal. Even after what I went through at Sugarloaf, I still had an itch to scratch when it came to getting scared and dealing with the paranormal and the unknown. And I told him yes, I would love to film for them, but I had no interest in joining in. I was okay with watching, and just getting to be out there, looking into the paranormal again. So of course my next question was, when and where are we going to be doing this at first? When he answered me, I got a terrible gut feeling, and I wish so much that I had trusted my gut and told him that I had changed my mind. Remember that lantern light out near Sugarloaf? He asked me as if there was any way I could ever forget. Yeah, I stammered. Why do you ask? I told my group the story, and they want to do a ritual there to see if we can contact the spirit and find out why it is there and what it wants. Bob replied. I don't know, man, I said. Oh, come on, Josh, trust me. You will be safe, and I am going to pay you $250 just to sit there and film it, he retorted. At the time, I was about to become a father, and money was tight because diapers, formula, and the like cost a small fortune. Not to mention it was my first kid and my new wife's first kid, so she had been going crazy spending money on not just the necessities, but also buying only top-of-the-line baby products like toys, crib, playpen, baby monitors, stroller, car seat, a combination pack, and play changing table, diaper genie, and designer baby clothes. So because my wife was putting us in the poorhouse, I had to weigh out my fear of the area he wanted to go back to, with how important it was that I make all the extra money I could. So against my better judgment, I accepted this offer. And a week later, I was in the same beat-down celebrity Bob was driving 3 years before. This time with Bob and 2 guys and 1 girl that were complete strangers to me. They were each dressed very gothic, and had these pentagram necklaces or something of the sort. It was 11:50 when we got there, and the 4 of them sat in a tight circle, and I was behind them to the right about 5 feet from the barbed fence, that was in front of the field that led to the hillside. And my back was to the hillside and bushes at the fence line. And I was filming my friend's circle as they all started chanting something. As I've been typing this entire post, I've been getting knots in my stomach, knowing that I was coming to this part of the story. This part of the story haunts my dreams and even waking hours to this day. I'm going to do my best to describe how the following events unfolded, though I know mere words cannot do justice to the pure terror that ensued or how horribly horrific the events sounded and were. So when reading or listening to this, turn your imagination all the way up. And believe me when I say, up to this point in my life, I was interested in the paranormal. It was a fun hobby to go out ghost hunting or getting myself spooked or whatever, but after this night, I never look at the paranormal as fun or interesting anymore. I show it respect and stay as far away as possible. As much as I dread it, I will now finish telling this story. As his group is chanting, Bob lights up this huge candle in the middle of them and opens up some sort of book. It's not like a scary antique spell book or anything. It looks like a newer hardcover. Anyways, he starts reciting words from it, and then he looks at his phone and tells his group to be quiet and look up the hill. I turn the camera, and at midnight, on the dot, the lantern appears. One member of Bob's group blurts out, "Cool!" I roll my eyes since the way these people were dressed and the way they carried themselves, the word cool didn't seem to fit in their vocabulary. Then Bob says to his group to join hands as they attempt to communicate with the spirit. I turn my back to the light and begin to film the group as they began again chanting, and Bob reads from the book. Then they start asking questions in hopes the spirit will respond. About this time a wind picks up and Bob's candle goes out. He tells everyone to hold on and tells me, "Cut the camera for a minute." And I oblige and stop recording and watch as Bob tries his lighter, and then 2 lighters from his group, but none of the lighters are working. I'm sitting down watching the group when I start hearing a rustling behind me. I jump up, leaving the camera on the ground, and spin around. Bob and his group are preoccupied with their candle and lighter problem, and as I spin around I am blinded by the brightest light I have ever seen. What I believe was the lantern up close and personal, but as quick as it appears the light is gone, and the lantern is nowhere to be seen. If it had been the lantern that blinded me, it had moved from the hillside across the field and right behind me with me not realizing it, within the span of maybe 30 seconds. I look around for the lantern on the hillside and nothing. It's only 12:15 or so, and the light has always stayed until sunrise. At this moment the wind quits blowing, and I hear Bob's lighter finally flick, and I see it light up, and I mutter, "Guys, did you see that?" They all turn and ask what I am talking about, but before I can answer them, we're all stopped dead in our tracks by a distant laughter, coming from seemingly nowhere, and everywhere around us, but distant at the moment, like far off. And this is no ordinary laughter. This laughter sounds like the laughter of hundreds, maybe even thousands of children that haunts me to this very moment. As I type this, I am looking around the room I am in. Whenever I think or talk about this experience, I can vividly remember that terrifying sound and hear it in my head. Also, it just occurred to me that if you put the letter S at the beginning of laughter, it spells slaughter. Why did I just think that? The best way I can describe this laughter is for you to imagine listening to a large group of kids singing "Row, row, row your boat." You know how one kid will start and seconds later another will join in, starting at the beginning of the song, and so on and so forth. Well, this sounded like I said hundreds or thousands of children laughing, as if one would start laughing and seconds later another would, and that pattern went on in an endless loop. I'm not saying the laughter sounded like the song "Row, row, row your boat." I am saying they laughed in unison just like kids do when singing "Row, row, row your boat." One would start, then seconds later another would, then another, and another, and another, and the laughter was getting louder, closer. There was sinister laughing, goofy laughing, giggling all around us, coming from all directions. I was shaking. I could not move. I was spinning around and around, looking off in the distance. This couldn't be real. This sort of thing does not happen. What the fuck was happening? I scream at Bob and his group that we need to get the fuck out of there. But they are already running for the car, leaving their Wiccan book and candle behind. And without hesitation I run after them and jump in the car just as the laughter is becoming deafening. We haul ass out of there and drive about a mile up the road and pull over as Bob is in no condition to drive, as we are all freaking out. We all get out of the car, pacing around the car, asking each other if we really just heard what we heard. I tell Bob that I am sorry, but I left his camera behind. He says that he does not care, and that he isn't going back for it. At this point I got my hands on my knees, panting, trying to catch my breath, as I have never in my life been so terrified. That is when all of our chatter stops, as we once again hear the laughter off in the distance, very quietly at first, but slowly getting closer and closer and louder until once again it's becoming deafening. We jump back in the car and speed away. We drive about 6 miles, and for the first 3 miles we can all still hear the laughter in the distance, with our windows down a little. We all begin to calm a little by mile 4, when the laughter can no longer be heard, but we have no intention of pulling over again, and Bob's friend is in the passenger seat with his phone, waiting for a signal to pop up. And at about mile 6, Bob's friend says, "Hey, I got full bars." And he hands the phone to Bob, and he calls a friend of his who is into the occult and well versed and educated in it. And as we are driving, he is describing what happened to the lady. Bob later told me his friend told him she believed it was the children of Hecate, or something like that. I have no idea about what Hecate is, but it sounded like more of a guess to me. Anyways, as Bob is on the phone, speeding out of the area, me and the other 2 people in the back seat all get a chill at the same time. And they told me later that just like me, the hair on the back of their neck stood up as loud snapping noises came from the front end of the car, and Bob's celebrity stops dead in its tracks and will no longer move forward. He tries everything, but the car is not moving. We later discover that a tie rod had snapped. Anyways, the friend Bob was talking to on the phone only lived about 20 minutes away from where we were, and they said they were on their way. As we sat in the car, nobody spoke, and after about 3 minutes we saw a pair of headlights coming down the road towards us. We knew it was too soon to be Bob's friend, but me and Bob thought maybe we could get a ride from a local, and we all unloaded out of the car and stood in front of it, waiting on the vehicle to hopefully stop. Now I cannot be certain, but my gut tells me I am correct. But the vehicle doesn't stop. As it comes into view, it is a beat-up old pickup truck, and it slows down, and in the truck there are 2 men in their 30s to 40s, with huge beards, and they stare at us and speed up after passing by. I look at Bob, and before I can speak, he says what I was already thinking. "The guy's in the boat!" Before I can say anything back, we see headlights coming from the direction the truck that passed by just went. And we went still and quiet as the same guys in the same truck passed by slowly again, staring at us on the side of the road. Bob called his friend back and told her to drive like hell and get here now, and hung up. 4 or 5 minutes go by and we see headlights coming. Relieved, we all get our stuff ready, thinking it is Bob's friend. Then his phone rings. It was the lady who was coming to get us, telling Bob she took a wrong turn and is going to be about 10 to 15 more minutes before she gets there. Bob hangs up the phone and watches in terror, as I do, as the same truck slowly passes by again, this time with only one of the boatmen in the truck. This time, though, the driver slows to a crawl and says, "Looks like you fellers could use some help," and then speeds up and drives off. This cemented the fact to Bob and I that we were definitely dealing with the boat guys. But Where the hell did the other guy go? Why wasn't he in the passenger seat? And to make matters worse, at this point, something we had almost completely forgot about due to the boatmen was immediately reminded to us as we begin to hear the laughter again off in the distance, but all around us like before, and over the next few minutes it started getting closer and closer. I'm almost pissing my pants as the sound is getting deafening and we have nowhere to run this time. And then from behind our car, off in the distance, we see two sets of headlights come on and two vehicles coming towards us slowly, side by side, taking up the entire width of the backcountry dirt road, both coming our way. The laughter now seems to be coming from the woods on both sides of the road we are stuck on, and the laughing seems to be zeroing in on us, as if hundreds or thousands of children are within reaching distance of us. There is no wind, no sound other than the crunch of the tires on the rocky dirt road of the two vehicles slowly driving towards us, with our last shred of hope fading away into the laughter of the children, and the headlights of the two vehicles surely being driven by the boatmen. We are given a reprieve, as at this time, coming from the other direction we see another set of headlights, coming fast. We hold our breath, the laughter, the boatmen. What could be next? How will we get out of this? And that is when the vehicle that was coming fast pulls up, and it's Bob's friend. She unlocks the doors on her car and rolls her windows down and begins to tell us to get in. When this happens, the two sets of headlights coming from the other direction turn off, and Bob's friend says, "Oh my God, you weren't kidding about the laughing kids." She screams at us to get in, and we do. We begin to tell her about the boat guys, and she turns the car around, and no sooner than she starts to drive away, the two sets of headlights come on again, this time with their bright sun, and they are about a car length behind the car we are all crammed in. I yell to the driver, "Go, go, go!" channeling my inner Jeff Goldblum, telling her, "Faster, must go faster." She floors it, and for about a mile the two vehicles stay on our ass. Then they turn off onto a side road. For about the next 2 miles after that, we can all hear the laughter still way off in the distance, with our windows down. Then after 3 miles the laughter was gone. To this day I have no explanation to what happened, what the laughing children were, why the laughing followed us, if the boatmen were connected to all this somehow, or if they were merely a coincidence that happened to terrify us at the same time as the paranormal stuff was happening. And if that is the case, why did they not react to the laughing children sound? Is the lantern connected to the laughing children, or did Bob and his group mistakenly call forth the laughing children through their ritual? Like I said, this happened years ago, but I still feel as terrified now when I tell people about it or think about it. I have had constant chills and goosebumps as I have written this. I'm sorry for typos or grammar issues, but I am a bit shaky as well. I'm going to post this story as is. I hope it is readable, and I hope somebody who reads this and has had a similar experience can share their story with me. In a weird way, I believe that would help me deal with the trauma this experience still causes me to this day. To all of you who think the paranormal is just a fun hobby to get your thrills with, I beg of you, and I warn you, that we are not prepared for what is really out there. You can think nothing will scare you or harm you, but you are dealing with unknown things. You have no idea how powerful or mundane the paranormal could be. If you use the paranormal as a thrill-seeking hobby, just use caution and always have your vehicle checked out beforehand. Oh, and watch out for seemingly sociopathic hillbillies and laughing children. Hope everyone who reads this sleeps well, but I know that after telling my story like this, that for at least the next few nights, I will be getting no sleep at all. I'm editing my post at the moment, and I just remembered kind of an important coincidence. When we had driven fast away from the lantern in 2003, after it came swooping across the field towards us, the song Unforgiven by Metallica had been playing on the radio, and then in 2006, when we had first heard the laughter, when we were by the hillside and jumped in the car, the same song was on again. this time on a mixtape that one of Bob's fellow Wiccans had made and brought. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Experiences, episode 24. And here we have it, as promised, a slightly longer video than usual today, and that is very much thanks to the person who wrote the last story there. They also wrote the old mom story that I had out last week, a very creepy story about the watchful ghostly mother figure. So many thanks to Joshua for sending his story in. Let's just hope he has a less eventful life from here on in, because I think the poor guy needs a break. I would of course like to say big thanks to everyone whose stories I've used in this week's video. And also, let me see, this is Friday, so tomorrow I'll have a TIFU for you. Had no trouble at all getting that together this week, it was very surprising. But the glitch video proved a little more troubling, which is usually the other way around. I'm usually struggling to get a TIFU done, and the glitch isn't too bad. Ah well. Hopefully things will be a bit better for next week. Okay, I'm going to head off for now, because I think it's snack time for me. Some very important snacks to go eat. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.